afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the TDP. We're all very excited to meet you, the new lecturers for this program. As you see, we said we are part of the Fundani Center, and we are in the Student Learning and Development Unit, where we are in charge of the tutorial training program. So today, we would like to speak to you about how to manage and conduct a tutorial program in your courses, in your faculty. We want to speak more about that. So the question is, why make use of a tutorial system? So we've been involved in the Fundani Center, we've been involved in the Student Learning Unit. So we work closely with students, and Rosina and I conducted research among students about their practices. So what we discovered is one crucial point, and that is that peer engagement at university should not be underestimated. So you are all lecturers, right? And you have 7 lectures a week. I'm not sure how many lectures you have a week. Can I get some kind of indication? 3 per subject. And they are what? An hour? 1 hour and 20 minutes. So students then meet you at these lectures, and we have 3 lectures, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right? Their role is to sit in your lecture, to take note, to read, and to ask questions. So that's the formal space that students engage in at the university. But we have found increasingly that students actually engage in more informal spaces at the university. Right? They do come to lectures, but the informal spaces that they do engage in is amongst their peers. So they would ask their peers questions. Maybe you've also done it when you were a student. Ask your peers questions. If they discover that there's a student that was performing very well, they might approach that student and ask that student for help. So we're saying that peer support and peer engagement is crucial, and perhaps you should think of putting a formal program in place to encourage peer support. So because you're finding that students have their own tutorials in their residences, their own tutorials as they, pass a bench or sit at the bench and then start engaging on a particular subject matter. So as a lecturer, to institute a formal peer support program would be very good for the students. The research suggests that peer support offers the students the opportunity to grow academically and to deepen their learning and to find their own voices as well. The assumption is that engaged students are more likely to persist, to achieve, and to be successful. And that is the research all over the world, that the more the students are engaged in their learning, they will most likely succeed. The more students spend time on their learning, they will most likely succeed. So from that premise, we suggest that a tutorial program and tutorial space is a good space for students to engage in. And we also argue that the institution provides academic support, and that is us, the Fundani unit, providing academic support to students. We also say that these students are first-generation students at CPT. Most of our students are first-generation students. So these first-generation students, meaning that they are the first in the family to attend a university. Many of them also come from backgrounds where English is not their first language. So they come to university and everything is in English, right? So we feel that more support needs to be given to these first-generation students, and the tutorial programs is one way of doing that. When students are engaged in learning in constructive ways, they also will feel a sense of belonging. And we feel that if, as first-generation students, you come from maybe the rural areas, or you come from a background where you're not used to this type of environment, and immediately you might have that sense of alienation. because this is not a familiar space in which you are engaged in. So, going to the lectures, attending the lectures, taking down notes and so on, that's one space. Whereas the tutorial space could help students feel that sense of belonging. If they have a tutorial and they see that, oh, there's a third-year student and he has gone through the program and he's just like me. I want to be like him when I'm in third year. So that type of tutorial program encourages that role modeling and the aspirations that students have can be met through that tutorial program. Students engage in their learning at the university. And our research has shown that when faculties and departments build stronger connections with peer support programs, tutorial programs, students can begin to address their learning at university in more constructive and formal ways. So we feel that lectures play a crucial role in building those bridges between the various the faculties and the support structures.
So you said about it's not only about lectures and covering content, but then in a semester like this where we are very pressed for time, we don't even have 10 weeks to cover 10 chapters. And then the public holidays are thrown in and you lost. So I've lost my 3 tutorial sessions and now I struggle because it's like I can't not go through the content, but the tutorial is so essential that we do go to those application kind of things. So how do we I hear the peer informal program and I go, great, they can do it over the weekends, which is not going to happen.
Yeah, I think that, we've also been discussing that, the sort of unstable educational environment that we are in, it's not business as usual, and we're also saying that what we need to do is to build into online programs. And I suppose it's late now for you, but perhaps for next year, 2018, to have an online platform in which students can engage in. I know there's Blackboard, but there are many other online platforms in which you can encourage students to do those activities, and especially for the subject that you mentioned, where they actually have to sit individually, perhaps you could use the Blackboard platform for them to do those activities and then to submit it to you. So we've got to think of the face-to-face lecture environment, then we've got to think of the peer support that you provide, and the online environment that you can also access for that.
Okay, so I currently lecture 3 subjects. I'm going to tell you how I apply tutoring in those 3 subjects. The first one, it's an exit level subject, BTech. There, I don't have tutors. Now my question is that fine? Because the thing is that who is going to be my tutor? Is it going to be master's students, PhD students? Sometimes there's none in my department, so how do I apply tutoring in exit level subjects? And then the other 2 subjects, both of them, it's auditing and financial accounting, second year level. Those are big subjects and they've got multiple lecturers and there is a coordinator for each subject. So the coordinator is basically the one who appoints tutors, he gives tutors what they need to be doing, etc. So for financial accounting, tutors don't teach any theory whatsoever. So what we would do is we would give the tutor an exercise, a question, and then the tutor would then obviously take the students through that exercise. For auditing, it's the same. It's also a theory subject, but then we would give the tutor some questions to test the practical application thereof. Is that fine?
So it seems that you have some structure there. So you have someone that is in charge of the tutorial system and that does all the appointing of the tutor. Do you have a say in that?
Yes, we do have a say.
You do have a say in that. And do you have, I think that, for programs that exist, what you also need to do is to evaluate it, to look at, do you at any point give feedback to the students or to the organizer of the tutorial system. So to build in feedback and also to build in observation of those tutorials is also a good idea. I mean, you don't have to observe every tutorial, but perhaps occasionally you should inform the tutors that you're coming to the tutorial. But obviously it must be done in a very constructive manner because they are still students. So I would say that for a system like that, you need to have that observation and that evaluation. We are increasingly getting more masters and PhD students. So I don't know in that field, but perhaps to investigate where are the master students that we can access in the faculty.
I meant to say that in this morning's meeting, the TDG apparently is now what funds all tutors. So every faculty has a budget for tutors and TAs. So it's not to say that there isn't a budget available, you just need to find out what that budget is. How you get your tutor depends entirely on the philosophy within your department. In some departments, tutors are given to the subjects at risk. So you might say, but we don't have very many subjects at risk, but how I want to conceptualize my tutorial is very different. It needs to be a space of engagement where students can discuss and engage with the concepts that we learn in the classroom a little bit further. So these, we don't determine in terms of the departments and the faculties how they allocate the tutor budget. What we do know is that very often it is allocated to subjects at risk first. But what we also know is that there's some departments who don't necessarily make use of their tutor budget. So I think you would need to interrogate this a little bit further. What's very important to realize too, and I think someone said it earlier, that the tutors aren't there to teach. They never, and we often find it's a huge contention with lectures because they say, no, they don't want tutors because the tutors teach the students something different. And what we say, it's not the responsibility of the tutor to teach. They just need to recap what you've already done. Because it's a dangerous space to say, teach. Okay. They can only engage with the tutees what you've already taught. So in comes your next question, the difference between the tutor and the TA, and where that came about is when an evaluation of the tutorial program was done. Lecturer said, we need support. We can't oversee our programs, we can't oversee the tutors and take responsibility for them. We need support. So the teaching assistant came on board, and the teaching assistant is the BTEC, the Masters, the PhD student. They can teach some teaching, not all your teaching. They're not a lecturer replacement. And so the TAs then take responsibilities for the tutors, but they're also able to, if you feel the TA needs to recap by teaching what it is that you've already done, again to either the tutors or the tutees, then they can do that. But the TAs have a lot more of an academic responsibility toward the lecture, so it's supporting you in not only your academic responsibilities, but also in some of your administrative responsibilities. But essentially they're not tutors, and they haven't been conceptualized as a tutor. They're really a lecturer support. Is that in terms of how you develop your lecture, is that we have to be aware that everyone learns differently. And so all of you, it's important for us to be engaged with you. So you to sit here from, let's say, 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock. We're probably putting you to sleep if we only just spoke to you without getting any feedback from you. And so it's the same with tutorials, is to ask yourself, why do we need this tutorial? What is the purpose of this tutorial? What am I wanting students to achieve? And so is it because I want them to be lectured again? But you need to really ask yourself why. And if it is a tutorial and it's not a lecture, what else do we need to be aware of? What's important for students to learn? And so the awareness of learning styles, to know that students all learn differently. You know, one student might be auditory, so they like to listen. Others are put to sleep by that. Others want more visual graphics, videos, whatever. So they want to see things. Others prefer to do things. And so it's important that even in your lectures and when you plan your tutorials with your tutors, is that one gives consideration to this. And so that your tutorial sessions is not just another lecture that your student is going to be delivering, but that it's an engaging process for your students. And so you could, and we don't have to do this, but yeah, maybe if you could just take one and pass along. And so there's lots of like online activities that you could actually direct students to even ask them just to do their own assessment of what their own learning style is. The students are able to identify it, and very often when we do tutor training, we ask them, what do you prefer? And a lot of them discover, actually I didn't know that there was a particular learning style, and I have a preference toward one style rather than the other. And so this is just an online little questionnaire that will tell you whether you're more visual, kinesthetic, or an auditory learner. But you know and the awareness of that people learn differently. We all learn differently. Okay. But then there's also the whole concept of, and this was developed by, I don't know if you're familiar with Honey and Mumford, anyone? Or you're familiar with Cole, David Cole and his experiential learning? So we know that our students go out into industry, and there's a reason why they go out into industry. Because now we're wanting them to identify where they fit into the bigger picture. So it's not just about the theory, it's not just about the textbook knowledge, but it's actually also about applying what they've learned. So Honey and Mumford was other theorists that took David Cole's experiential learning model and looked at actually, so we have this different learning styles, but we also have different characteristics. And so they developed these 4 different styles of learning. And so they came up with, and you'll find probably you have particular characteristics, and so you could classify yourself into one of these as well. And so they found that you have reflectors, you have theorists, pragmatists, and activists. And these 4 different learning styles, there are certain activities that lends itself to that particular character. Now we have, and maybe we could make that available online. We'd have to scan it or something. So we have a questionnaire that one can actually do where you could also identify what your particular preference is. And so when we do our tutorial training, and in actual fact there's an example up top on the board on that side, is that when we train the tutors, we train the tutors to identify learning styles and to develop activities that speak to those particular learning styles. So they need to understand, how does the theorist think? And what does the theorist need to learn well? The activist, what's that personality like? And what do they need in terms of when they develop an activity that speaks to that specific style? So when the tutors are trained, they train and they actually go through and they develop a whole tutorial that speaks to the 4 different learning styles. And then they offer it to the rest of the class. So they have loads of fun doing that because they themselves actually discover what works best for them. And so we encourage the lecturers to also give consideration to this. And I know that, and I now put down here, and we'll talk about this in a minute too, is that there's so much pressure to go through content that we forget that we're actually dealing with individuals in the room. So we're very focused on getting through the content, getting through the textbook, getting through, I don't know what it is that you use, that we forget that actually, how are we really assessing that whoever's in our lecture is getting this? So it's important to ask yourself, what is it that the students need to develop to do that subject? And the tutorials very often, because in the lecture when you're going through your content, it's not always the space where you're assisting students to work through how to apply this practically. But in the tutorials, one needs to think about, so what do we do practically to get the student through this? And I'm sure that you've already done this whole concept of constructive alignment, have you? And you've worked with your Anderson and Crathwell, and you've worked with Blues and all the rest. Okay. So the same with tutorials is you need to ask yourself, what do the students need? What are the skills? What are the values? What do they need to achieve in this particular subject? And then what are the activities that we use to help them along? So at the end of the day, constructive alignment, they have to make meaning. Meaning doesn't sit with you. Okay. Tutorials are never there to teach new things, like we said earlier. It always has to be linked to a lecture work that's already being done. And it really is just a way of students being able to revise, go through, recap, etc. And then it's also that space where there can be the practical application, learning how to apply theory. It's where students are able to learn how to make meaning of content. And then the thing that's very important about the characteristic of a tutorial is it has to really have these 4 components. So always make sure that there's stimulus materials. What are they working with? That there's an interpretation of the task. So that's that meaning-making component. Okay. What do they need to do? What's the instruction to the individual student? And then what we find also quite useful is in tutorials, because we always ask students about their engagement in large classes. And I don't do most of you have large classes, small classes?
Yeah.
Large classes. So you have that 1 or 2 students that don't care and they love to engage and they ask lots of questions, and sometimes that might be irritating to lectures like we hear. And then there's those students that have the questions but they never really ask because they're not quite sure, is it a clever enough question, or they don't have the words or the language to say. And so tutorials is also a space where we encourage students. In actual fact, we say to our tutors, everyone in your tutorial has to add and share. They can miss once, but they have to engage. Okay. And so it's also a space where you can develop the confidence of your students. And then also it's feedback. Students get a lot of feedback. Tutees can get feedback from their tutors. But lecturers can also get feedback in terms of, are students attending? Are they struggling? Are they managing? And that's where what Najwa was alluding to earlier, when you have those regular meetings with your tutees, because do we really know our students? And through the tutorials, it's one way of how we could actually get to know who our students are and where they're struggling and where you can extend help. And also, we encourage lecturers to also get written reports from your tutors. Because a tutor can claim to, if the program hasn't been formalized, yes, I've seen so many students and I've worked my 40 hours, and there's just no evidence of any of that if it's not formalized. Although I know that written reports is not something that happens that often, but there are lecturers who actually get written reports from their tutors as evidence that they have actually worked. And then if you're fortunate enough to have a TA2, is to establish a good working relations with both your tutors and your TAs. It also establish a method of communication, and it doesn't necessarily only have to be face-to-face meetings. It can be other forms of communication, whether it be online through WhatsApp or Blackboard, although a lot of students don't necessarily have access to Blackboard off campus. And Blackboard always says, e-learning always says to us, it's not e-learning's problem, it's our problem, because our internet wherever we are is not that great. So there's other ways and means of communicating, is to find those channels of communication.